What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going with my starts of the week for week 10 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Let's dive right into it. And start of the week at the quarterback position for me, it's an easy one. It's Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Now, I typically prefer him at home where he plays his best football, but on the road in Los Angeles, we're still in an indoor venue, so it all counts the same to me. But this should be the game of the week, 48.5 point over-under, which is the highest on the entire week 10 slate. 1.5 point spread, so it should be close back and forth. And the Lions only a 25 point implied team total, which is one of the higher ones of the weekend. So I'm expecting a decent amount of scoring in this game. And on the season, Jared Goff, he's been great. 270 passing yards per game, 1.5 passing touchdowns, which I think there's upside for more touchdowns in a plus matchup like this because the Los Angeles Chargers have been bleeding points to the quarterback position this season. Through 9 weeks, they currently rank 30th versus the position, meaning they're allowing the third most points per game at 22.6, over 300 passing yards, 1.5 passing touchdowns. So Jared Goff, I think, is in line for a great game this week. And I think he's a high-end QB1. I currently have him number 3 in the entire week, only behind guys like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. But Joe Burrow, he's dealing with a lot of injuries this week at the wide receiver position, so honestly, he could come in at number 2. Moving on to running backs, number 1 for me is going to be Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he is not an exciting running back by any means, pretty inefficient, but the one thing we do like about him is that he's a starting running back for an offense that can put up fantasy points when Joe Burrow is on his game. And the past month now, Joe Burrow has looked excellent. The Bengals have a 26.5 implied team total, which is the second best, only behind the Dallas Cowboys. That come in as 6.5 point favorites at home versus a pretty poor run defense in the Houston Texans, who are currently ranked 20th versus the running back position. Now, they are only allowing 80 rushing yards per game, but nearly a rushing touchdown, 42 receiving yards. But on the season, Joe Mixon is getting plenty of work. 16 carries per game, 60 yards, 0.4 rushing touchdowns, also 3.5 targets, which equates to nearly a 10% target share. In the past 2 weeks for Joe Mixon, having pretty good football. 20 fantasy points versus the San Francisco 49ers at 5.4 yards per carry, which is the best of the season. Last week, highly inefficient versus Buffalo, but did get into the end zone, also received 6 targets, so that kind of volume versus Houston Texans in this potential game script with T. Higgins out and maybe even Jamar Chase, so an even more focal point of the offense on Joe Mixon this weekend. I think he's lined up perfectly to have a great day. Number 2 for me at the running back position, it's a risky one, and I'm sure a lot of you hate him at this point, but Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons, and honestly, if you're a Bijan owner, you're probably at the end of the rope here. I know you're highly dissatisfied with where you picked him. I don't have him this year. I didn't like where he was going. I'm not saying you were stupid for taking him. The talent's insane. Who would have thought Arthur Smith would just not give him the football? But it's not been great for Bijan Robinson owners this year. But we get a great spot versus the Arizona Cardinals. And if he can't get it done in this spot, well, it might be time. You're not going to cut him, obviously, but the expectations need to severely be changed. Now, we've had 3 good games this year. Week 1 versus the Panthers, 20, 24 versus Green Bay, 21 versus Jacksonville. All pretty good matchups right there. And this matchup versus the Cardinals, they're currently allowing the 3rd most points per game to the position, 107 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, also half a receiving touchdown per game, and 28.6 fantasy points. And we know Bijan Robinson is involved in the passing game, nearly a 15% target share in this season. The problem is the volume on the ground. We are getting like 10 to 12 carries, it seems like, every single week. His highest carry count was week 2 versus the Green Bay Packers, where we saw 19. Outside of that, we have not broken 14 since week 4 and week 5, 11 carries the prior 2 weeks. Now, he's efficient with his touches, nearly 5 yards per carry, but the volume has not been there, and neither have the goal line carries. He has 1 touchdown on the season. So, again, not what we've expected. But 22.25 implied team total here for the Atlanta Falcons. I prefer Taylor Heineke. I understand to move the ball a little bit for this offense. And let's just hope he gets into the end zone because I think yardage-wise, he'll be fine in this game, but it all comes down to the touchdowns, which are pretty fluky, but this is a plus matchup, so let's hope for the best. And moving on to wide receivers, I love DeAndre Hopkins this week in this matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have been dreadful versus the wide receiver position this season, currently allowing the 2nd most points per game at 45.7, over 200 receiving yards and a touchdown and a quarter versus specifically wide receivers this season. I got Hopkins for nearly 16 points projected in this game. And the 2 weeks with Will Levis under center, that's the reason I like Hopkins first off, because there presents a lot more big play upside with Hopkins under center because Ryan Tannehill obviously just can't really get the job done like that. We did see 1 good game versus the Colts, but outside of that, it's been a really bad season for DeAndre Hopkins. But the 2 games with Levis versus Atlanta, 38 fantasy points, 128 yards, 6 targets, 3 touchdowns. Obviously, an anomaly there. He's not going to score 3 touchdowns every single week. Might not even get 3 touchdowns the rest of the season. Who knows? But did see 11 targets versus the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday night. Only 4 catches for 60 yards, but the volume is great, and he's a super talented receiver. We know that. Obviously, he's not in his prime anymore, but he can take advantage of this matchup. He has a 26% target share in the season and 40% market share of the team's air yards. This is a great week to hop on the Hopkins trains once again. Next up for me, it's 2 players, but both from the same team, so it's kind of a package deal here. But if you own either DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett, I realize it's not been a great season, especially from Geno Smith. And How Geno goes is how these guys are going to go because they're all paired together. But this is a great matchup versus the Washington Commanders at home. 26.5 implied team total, which is one of the highest of the entire week. 6-point favorites, and this defense has been Swiss cheese versus the past this season. Currently allowing the third most points per game to the position, nearly 200 receiving yards, 1.5 receiving touchdowns, and 42.2 points. Now, we do have JSN, who has been more involved in the offense the past month now, which is nice to see, so it could take a little bit away from both of these guys, but both are the main targets in this offense. Tyler Lockett on the season, nearly 7 targets per game on a 23% target share. DK Metcalf, pretty similar, 23.5% target share, although a 40% market share of the team's air yards, nearly 7 targets per game and 65 receiving yards. Metcalf offers more touchdown and big play upside, in my opinion. Both are firmly startable in this game, and even though it's been a pretty poor season from both, and the great games have been very few and far in between, but I love the upside this week. At the start of the week at the tight end position, since Dalton Kincaid is pretty much a firm stud at this point, you're starting him no matter what. Dalton Schultz will be the one that I am going with. Now, I realize it might seem like I am point chasing after last week, but I liked him heading into last week after the poor performance versus the Carolina Panthers. But before that, 16 points versus the Saints, 19 points versus the Falcons, 13 points versus the Steelers. But his big blow game versus that Buccaneers bad pass defense, where he had 31 fantasy points, 11 targets, 10 catches, 130 yards, and got into the end zone as well with 3 red zone targets, which was the highest of the season. CJ Stroud looked amazing last week, and if CJ Stroud's obviously not going to throw for nearly 500 yards every single week, but he looks good out there, and he's getting more comfortable in the pocket. Completion percentage has been going up in recent weeks. And this is a great spot versus Cincinnati Bengals. They are currently allowing the most points per game at the tight end position, 32nd, 16.3 points allowed per game, 66 yards, and half a receiving touchdown. And we just saw Dalton Kincaid get 11 targets and I believe 10 catches versus them last week. And they also draw themselves a pretty good game script for the ball quite often. 6.5-point dogs on the road in Cincy, 20-point implied team total, and 46.5-point over-under. On the season, Dalton Schultz has just roughly close to a 20% target share, half a receiving touchdown per game, and 6 targets. So fire him up this week as a solid tight end 1. With that being said, that's all I got for today's video. So if you enjoyed, make sure you like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Appreciate y'all watching. I'll see you all in the next one.